Welcome back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lundberg.
Today's episode, we're going to talk about 1986 Stand By Me, Rob Reiner film. But before we do that, let's go ahead and review last week's episode, which was Young Guns, right, Darin?
Right. Before we do that, though, I did want to mention, in case anybody's noticed, you're kind of missing something there, aren't you?
Yeah. I went ahead and shaved my beard. I do it once a year for my anniversary, so it's the one present I get to my wife each year.
Oh, well, happy anniversary. How many years is it?
15.
15 years. She's dealt with you for that long.
I know, man. It's been rough.
I'm sure we've all had our close calls. And you've had a close shave, so I guess that works.
But don't worry, next time I'll be scruffy again. So.
Okay, just so people aren't too thrown off by that. But yeah, we did talk about Young Guns last time from 1988. It's got a brat packing hot young cast. Back in the 80s, Emilio Estevez, Kiefer Sutherland, Charlie Sheen. Where did we fall on that movie? I know we had a fun time with it. It was big in both our childhoods. But how did you feel about it?
Well, I came down favorable on it. I liked this movie as a kid. It was something that I watched often with my family, and I always really enjoyed it. And so watching it again this time, I had a similar experience where I loved the characters. I again fell right back into it. And so for that reason, I would say it's worth remembering. And I know we talked about there were some technical flaws. Maybe it wasn't quite as showy as it could have been or as cinematic as it could have been, but and some music issues too, I think. But overall, I still really enjoy this movie. So I can look past some of those things and say it's worth remembering.
Okay. And, the worth a remake, it kind of has a negative connotation where we're coming from. I don't always mean it that way. I did like the cast. It felt like a Western. It didn't feel too anachronistic other than the electric guitars on the soundtrack. I just felt like with Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey versus Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, that there was potential, like I said, for something better, for a better grasp on the material, a more playful or expansive grasp. And that's what Young Guns 2 gave me. It felt like an actual honest-to-goodness Western. It was expansive. It did have the long, wide vista shots. It did talk about, Billy being, past his prime, like most Westerns do and things like that. So I just thought that the potential was there to make a better movie, and that's why I thought it was worth a remake. But I think there's still a lot of great things to remember fondly about Young Guns. So that's where we fell on that one.
Yep. All right, sounds good. So let's discuss Stand By Me. But before we do that, here's the trailer.
Oh man, wait to hear this. What is it, man? You guys want to go see a dead body? Good time. You run into something on your neck. Leeches! Oh my God! I want to see a dead kid. Maybe it shouldn't be a party. I'm never gonna get out of this town, am I, Corey? You! Come back here! You think Mighty Mouse could beat up Superman? What are you, cracked? I'll kill you, I swear to God.
All right, so Stand By Me, 1986, directed by Rob Reiner, starring River Phoenix, Will Wheaton, Corey Feldman, Jerry O'Connell, Kiefer Sutherland, John Cusack has a cameo in there, and then you have Richard Dreyfuss also doing the narrator. This was a big movie for me when I was a kid. I want to go into that in a minute, but first of all, let's talk quickly about Stephen King. And this movie was based on a novella that he wrote called The Body, and that story was kind of partially autobiographical, and it was based on events that happened in Stephen King's young life, and he recalls having these memories of playing with his friends, and they'd play on the railroad tracks, and actually one of his friends got hit by a train and was killed. And the story goes that he came home one day and his mom noticed he was like, why is a ghost? And he wouldn't talk. And so later she found out that his friend had been killed. And the legend states that, it's that event in Stephen King's life that possibly unlocked his uncanny ability to write horror. And I'm a big fan of Stephen King horror movies. I think they're really well done. But I also like his character studies, like Stand By Me and like Shawshank Redemption. Those kind of movies, they also appeal to me. And so I picked Stand By Me not because of Stephen King, but because of my experience with it. And when I was younger, I would often sneak upstairs late at night when everyone else was asleep, and I would watch movies. Usually movies I probably shouldn't be watching. They had like an R in front of them. But anyway, so one night I went upstairs and I turned the TV on, and Stand By Me was playing. I didn't know anything about it. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I started watching it, and right away I was sucked into the story. I could relate to the characters because I had a group of friends that were also similar or close in age, and we had similar experiences. We'd go on little campouts and we'd go on hikes and we'd do that kind of stuff. And we were kind of, I wouldn't say rebellious, but we would sneak out at night and we would go toilet paper in our, our teacher's house, that kind of thing, what young kids do. And actually thinking back on it, when I think about the things that I did when I was younger, like sneaking out when I was 11 or 12, if my kids did that today, it'd just be, it'd be like, you're not doing that. But anyway, so the movie, by the way, I was up there late at night watching this movie, and the one thing that sticks in my mind is the scene with the vomit scene. And this stands out because it was unexpected. I didn't know what was going to happen. And when they started vomiting on each other, like, I just thought it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. I started laughing hysterically, and it was late at night, so I didn't want to laugh too loud. So I was trying to suppress my laughter. And so the more I tried to suppress it, the funnier it became. And so I was trying not to laugh, trying to wake anybody up, and laughing my head off and crying. It was so funny. And so that scene, really stands out in my mind as a memorable scene for me. And it's probably that scene that, is why I'm so fond of this movie. But this time watching it, I didn't have that kind of reaction. I didn't think it was that funny. I was kind of like annoyed by it, because you could tell how fake it was. You could tell they had the hoses taped to their faces, and it was like just shooting out the side of their face. And so it wasn't really that funny this time around. But as a kid, I thought it was hysterical. And but overall, the whole movie, they had these different scenes with the leeches. They had these emotional moments, that the junkyard scene, and then finding the body at the end. All these things were like powerful to me, and of course they had the language, and we'll talk about that later too. But overall, I liked the movie a lot, and I can say it probably is one of the movies that kind of sparked a fascination for language for me. But like I say, we'll talk about it in a minute. But that's my history with it. So what's your history with it?
Well, I don't have fond memories of it. I know I didn't see it in a theater. This wasn't something that was in my wheelhouse when I was younger. I think my first memory when I think about it was probably on TV. I don't remember the lard ass scene because I think that was edited out of the TV versions, because for some reason the throwing up counts as violence or something like that. They had to cut a lot of that. And so I don't remember that specific. I remember it later when I was able to see it on video, but I must have seen it on TV or maybe at somebody else's house. All I remember is there was that feeling at the end when you've sat through and you've experienced something. You've seen all four of these kids kind of bond and grow closer together, and they've grown up by the end. And then there's this feeling of melancholy that sets in. And then you come to the part, spoilers, obviously, where you find out in their later stages in life that the Chris character, River Phoenix's character, has been killed. He gets in the middle of a fight in a restaurant, and he's knifed in the neck, and he dies instantly. And it's Richard Dreyfuss as Gordy as an adult who's reacting to it and how sad he is. And he's typing in his computer, I never again had friends like I had when I was 12. Like, does anyone? And I remember, I think that's my first memory of the movie, was that feeling of melancholy that sets in and the sad feeling. And I, as young as I saw it, maybe when I was 12 or something like that, I knew that if the ending was that powerful, that the movie did its job. I don't know if that makes sense. But, you know, you mentioned The Body. It comes from a series of novellas that Stephen King wrote called Different Seasons, where it takes it takes summer, fall, winter, spring, and he does like a kind of a novella based around each. And then Shawshank Redemption is part of that collection. The Body's part of that collection. Apt Pupil, that was directed later by Bryan Singer, starring Ian McKellen. That is part of that. And then there's a fourth story called The Breathing Method that's never been adapted. So that's where The Body comes from. I think, you know, growing up on Stephen King, he was really big in my childhood. You talk about, you know, sneaking up to the attic or a room upstairs to watch an R-rated movie. It was kind of against the rules. I think I mentioned before, that was never an issue in my house, mostly because my mom was away most of the time trying to support us. Like she rented Friday the 13th and Lethal Weapon for me as a babysitter. But she, you know, she didn't pay attention to that stuff. And I guess she thought I was smart enough that I could handle it. But you know, Stephen King books, she never had problems with either. You know, I could read whatever book I wanted, and Stephen King's books have a lot of stuff in it that kids probably shouldn't be reading, a little more graphic than even that shows in movies. But Stephen King was, I would say he was directly responsible for me wanting to be a writer. You know, reading which is my favorite of his books. Bill Denbrough, the lead character, is an author, and I think reading that, it made me want to be a writer. It made me want to be an author. I liked that idea. And reading a lot of his books, a lot of his stories, his lead characters are authors, right?
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to mention is, like you mentioned, a lot of his stories have writers as main characters, and a lot of writers do that. A lot of writers will write their main character as a writer. My wife has done that. She's a writer, and a lot of her main characters are writers. And I know you've done that too. I've read some of your short stories. And so, yeah, I think it's just something to do because you write what you know, right? You write what's familiar with you. So
yeah,
that makes sense. He does that.
Right. And then I guess talking about Stephen King and leading into all those things, you said that you like his character studies and things like that, right? Do you like his character studies better, his dramas like Stand By Me or Shawshank, or do you like his horror stories, which is what he's obviously good at?
Yeah, like I say, I think he's good at horror, and I like his horror. But I'm more partial to the character studies. I like a good story, a good script with you know, well developed characters and good dialogue. That really appeals to me. And so when I find that, I usually, you know, latch onto those kind of movies. And he's got a lot of it.
And I just think he's so good at horror that's kind of where I gravitate to. But I think my favorite thing that he's ever written was a short story called The Last Rung on the Ladder, which is about, again, it's told from a narration point of view, but it's about the narrator's a male, and he's talking about when he was kids, he and his sister were playing in a barn, and they were playing a game, and they were up high, and for some reason something happened where they fell, and the sister was hanging by the last rung of this ladder that was up in the loft. And so the brother had to rush, and he ran and grabbed some haystacks and basically stuck some bales of hay and stuck it under her so she would fall onto it. And then later on, he tells about how they were really close, but then they ended up going their separate ways, kind of like what happens at the end of Stand By Me. And his sister goes down a dark path and ends up killing herself. And so the whole story is about how he was remembering all their times together. And she wrote him a letter that basically said, you know, I think if thinking back on it, it would have been better if you hadn't have been there to save me. And so it's just this really heartfelt. I think he does that really well, and as well as he does the horror. And I like that a lot of it is autobiographical, like the train causing, clicking something in his brain to make that happen. I don't know. I just think that's interesting. He's interesting as a person and as a writer.
Yeah. Hey, real quick, I heard you mention that the Stand By Me, they talk about Chris's death at the very end of the movie. In the book, The Body, the other characters, Vern and Teddy, also die, but in the movie, they survive. So that's one thing they left in the movie, but they kept out of that's in the book, I mean.
Right. Well, you know, how long has it been since you've read The Body?
I've never read it.
Oh, you never. You just know that. Well, you know, Before you mentioned Stand By Me last time, and so I wanted to go back. I've read it a few times before, but I wanted to read it again just kind of to see how the adaptation went from the book to film. And
Mhm.
Stephen King is on record saying that he thinks Stand By Me is probably the best, his favorite of his adaptations. And I think that has to do with the fact that it's almost nothing has changed. Like the book is the movie. I know Rob Reiner changes, the main thing that he changes, there's a couple of things like Denny in the book isn't as close to Gordy. Like you can tell in the movie it's John Cusack, and they have to really hit you with these short scenes to make you realize that Denny meant a lot. And so they're really sentimentalized. They're hugging a lot, and there's a scene at the dinner table.
You gonna see Jane after the game? I think she's a lovely girl.
Dad, can you please have the potatoes?
Dorothy, don't talk to the boy about girls.
Dad.
You shouldn't be thinking about girls. This is the biggest game of his life. Dennis, when you're out there tomorrow.
Bob, did you read the story that Gordy wrote? Gordy wrote a story. It was really good.
What did you write, sweetheart?
Now, see, that's what I'm talking about. Football takes concentration. You start in on the girls and his mind's all over the place. Dorothy, I don't know how many
really
times
liked
I told you when I'm making
Thought it was
this
great.
I don't want you interrupting me. Now, you see I'm talking to the boy, don't you?
You know, that stuff is not in the book. In the book, in the novella, he's Dennis, as they call him. He's more of a character that, Gordy looks up to, but he's not there as present as he is in the books. And so when he dies, Gordy doesn't feel as deeply about it because he hadn't seen Dennis for a while. So that's one thing that he changed. The big major change is that he makes Gordy the more central character. In the book, it's Chris that grabs the gun and shoots it off and gets Ace, Merrill, and all the rest of the kids off of their case. But as Reiner was helping to write and directing the movie, he realized that Gordy was the main character. And so it would be his responsibility to be the adult, to grow up and grab the gun and be the person to kind of set that up. But as far as adaptations go, there's nothing much to change because it's very straightforward, and the autobiographical stuff, you don't want to lose any of that. And so a lot of that's in there. I just think it's interesting as an adaptation that it's not too drastic a change like some other books in the Stephen King canon have been.
Okay. The change you mentioned about the gun, I like that change. I like that it's Gordy and not Chris. And I like how they introduced the gun in the beginning of the movie before the trip starts, when Chris shows the gun to Gordy, and you realize they're taking a gun with them, and then you kind of forget about it. You forget that they have this gun and that it's with them, and the end when it pops out, you're like, oh yeah, they had a gun. You know what I mean? So it was kind of fun how they did that. And but yeah, I like that Gordy's the one that actually fires it off, and Gordy's kind of the one that stands up to Ace. I think that's good. But let's talk about the language in this movie, because like I said before, that kind of impacted me a lot. And I grew up in a kind of strict religious household. We weren't allowed to swear. It was forbidden. So that kind of stuck with me my whole life too. I didn't swear as a kid, and I don't swear now. And in fact, people, when they hear me swear, if it does slip out, they'll tell me, don't do that. You shouldn't do that. So I just don't do it. The only time I've ever really done it is when I'm playing a character in a play or a movie, and it's not me swearing, it's the character that's swearing. And then that's okay for some reason. But as myself, I can't do it. I'm not good at it. But also, if I'm really mad, it'll slip out. But I was gravitated towards people who were okay with swearing, people who would have the occasional swear word pop out. It always fascinated me because I was always like, how are you allowed to do that? You know what I mean? Because those are words that I wasn't allowed to say. So it always intrigued me. And I had some friends that were similar to the characters of the movie. In fact, one of the friends I grew up with, who he reminds me of the Teddy character, Corey Feldman's character. I mean, almost spot on is what he looks and sounds and acts like Teddy. And so whenever I see Corey Feldman in a movie, I'm always reminded of my friend that I grew up with. But unlike the movie where Gordy remembers or knows where his friends are and what happened to him, I have no idea what happened to my friends that I was close with back then in grade school. We kind of just faded away after junior high and high school. And that's when I met you, and we developed another group of friends. And I know you mentioned that watching this movie kind of, threw you back to our high school days and some of the memories we shared. So what are some of the memories that you can think of that we had?
Well, hanging out in a car, singing along to "They Might Be Giants" at the top of our lungs. That's mostly my memories. We went to movies all the time. We'd go to dinners. We'd um, basically go to parks, just hang out, and just chat a little bit, and obviously the exercises we did with plays and things like that. I don't know. I just watching the movie, there is that pull, and I think that's what everybody does when they're watching the movie. They remember the times when they were kids, and they had that core group of friends that were just everything to them at the time, and that all their memories of a certain time in their age, it kind of circles around them. So yeah, I mean that's a definite pull. And again, when they're walking, along and they're singing those different songs and things like that, and Lollipop, they sing like that, and the soundtrack especially, it reminded me of Time and Time Again when we were in that. We've talked about that play before, but I remember the VHS that we had that every cast member got. There was a little bit of a preview that they showed on the TVs. So to kind of entice people to come to the play, and during the little preview, they had Rock Around the Clock. They had Lollipop. For some reason, they had REM Shiny Happy People playing during which was not set in the 50s. But I don't know, just a lot of it was very nostalgic for me. That's the point of our podcast here, but it brought me back, and there was just a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling and stuff like that. I know you mentioned you got friends that were kind of interested in language and got to use more words.
Yeah. In fact, I will say that you were one of those friends that was, more freely, able to say these kind of words. And so that always was kind of like, like I say, intriguing to me. It was like, how do you allow to say those words? But anyway, so what do you think about language though in this movie? Like, do you think it's used too much? Do you think it's I don't know. What do you think? What's your thoughts on the language? Because there's kids using the language, right? These are young kids saying these words, and so that's why I think it could be troublesome. But what do you think?
Well, when it's kids these age, what are they, 11, 12, something like that? When they use words like that, and maybe you have some experience, I don't know, like in your childhood. I know you said you weren't allowed to use those words, but obviously kids, they rebel, and they end up doing things that they're not supposed to when they're with that core group. I know they're smoking, things like that, but it's kind of shocking to hear them use those words. Sometimes we forget as parents, and it has kids in it. You forget that this movie is rated R, even though that's something that's in your head when you pop it in like the DVD player. But Micah, our youngest, was flitting in and out, and he sat down for a little bit when the boys were talking. And about the third or fourth time they swore, Micah looked at both of us and said, "How old are these kids?" Like, it's funny, like our 8-year-old being able to do that.
Well, you mentioned that your son came in and out. We actually talked about whether or not we should have our son watch the movie. Our oldest, who's 13 now. We're like, should we allow him to watch this? And then once we realized, no, we probably shouldn't, I was glad we didn't let him watch it because there's so much language. And I think it probably would have offended him.
Okay. So I don't know, were there any times when you were young and you were kind of rebellious with your language choices?
Yeah, I guess so. I can think of one experience I had where a friend of mine, I was in 4th grade, I think, and we were kind of going back and forth, and he was trying to outdo me as far as how many bad words he could use. And I couldn't say them, but I could write them. So I would take a piece of paper and I'd write down all the bad swears I could think of. And I filled the whole page. And then I ended up putting it in his desk, and he went and showed it to the teacher. And so the teacher was, shocked, obviously. And then she called the guidance counselor, and I was driven home, like right then and there, like taken home. And they took me to my dad's work, actually. And they stopped him from working to show him this piece of paper that had all these bad words written on it. And he looked at me like he was about ready to, he was so mad at me. And I got in big trouble. But yeah, but I mean, that's my story with, with language. I think that's why I'm so fascinated by it too. But what do you think about about all this and the language in the movie and everything? You think it's something that, because they're kids that are saying these words, right? Like, these aren't adults, these are young kids using this kind of language.
Yeah, and again, that's kind of why it's shocking. Again, they're doing it for, they think they're being adult. Even the teens, Kiefer Sutherland and Casey Schmachko, all those characters who aren't in the book, they don't pop up until the very end. I know that it mentions that, this is where, Billy, he told his friend about finding the body, and then somebody tells Ace, and they're in a pool hall or they're fishing, and in the movie you actually see it because again you have to show instead of telling, as opposed to a book. But even the teenagers, when they're hanging out or when they're playing the mailbox baseball, it's just for show. I get the feeling that they don't really know what the words mean or what connotations that come with them. They're just using them because it makes them sound edgy. It makes them sound cool and adult, which isn't always the case. But I guess that's interesting when you talk about R-rated movies and things like that, and how they're kind of not something we kind of get addicted to them because we aren't supposed to. I just think it's interesting as far as R-rated movie goes. This one, compared to say a Hostel or I Spit on Your Grave, those kind of rape revenge movies, those get an R rating. But then something like Stand By Me or The Breakfast Club also get R ratings. I don't think that's a fair system, especially since we talked about it before. The Breakfast Club is aimed specifically towards teenagers. And by saddling it with the R rating, you are purposely taking them out of the equation. I know teens like us were able to see R-rated movies, but there are some teens that can't do that don't have a way to do that. And so shutting them off from a world like that and lugging that into the same, again, I'm reminded of a movie called It's Complicated with Meryl Streep and Steve Martin, where there's a scene where they smoke marijuana and then they spend the rest of the night. It's a funny scene where they're kind of high, and the movie has no language in it. It has no R-rated language. It has no violence. It has no sex scenes, but it's saddled with an R rating because of that, the marijuana smoking scene. Why is that lugged into the same category as a Friday the 13th? Or these torture porn movies? I don't understand. I just think I don't know. What do you think about that? I think the rating system, it needs to have something different.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that we should change the rating system a little bit, because it isn't fair that a movie like Waiting for Guffman gets an R rating, same as RoboCop, where there's like really extreme violence. Which, by the way, is one of those movies I probably shouldn't have seen, because RoboCop scarred me. When I saw his hand get blown off and his head get blown away. Like, I just remember being so shocked by that. But yet, hearing hearing an F word in Stand By Me wasn't quite as shocking. You know what I mean? But yet they're both rated R. So it's like, there's got to be a way to differentiate the two.
And we've had plenty of conversations with Tanner where we talked about language, and he said before, I hear language like that every day. Like when he was back in high school or junior high, I heard language like that in the hallways in the middle of classes. Like, you wouldn't believe the words that you hear. And we kind of pride ourselves with our kids as they don't use that language. I know Tanner, now that he's almost 20, he kind of tests the waters a little bit. His mom likes to use his mom and his dad. I have to make sure that I put dad, otherwise Liz is going to feel like I'm throwing her under the bus. But mom and dad like using words like, a-hole will come up, or dad will come up, or not dad, or damn will come up, things like that. And he'll kind of test the waters. He'll say damn, he'll say ass, like to kind of, you guys are saying, is it okay? And so, but for the most part, our kids, they recognize when bad words come up and they know not to use them because they are aware that it's not something that should be part of their daily language. But that's a difficult, I guess that's where you need to worry, because the MPAA is more a parental guidance kind of thing, making sure that kids don't take the messages the wrong way that they see in them.
Well, Rob Reiner directed this movie, and I mentioned to you before that we always talk about Rob Reiner. It seems like we did A Few Good Men, that was Rob Reiner. We talked about The Sure Thing, Rob Reiner. We talked about Spinal Tap, and then we're doing Stand By Me. And I like him as a director, mainly because I like that he's able to jump over and cross genres. He doesn't stick with one genre. He's not stuck doing horror. He's not stuck doing romantic comedies or anything. He can do them all. I mean, and so I like that. But I don't think that Rob Reiner has a specific, unique voice or anything. I don't think that you can tell a Rob Reiner movie just because it's a Rob Reiner movie. You could be watching Sleepless in Seattle and not know it's a Rob Reiner movie or whatever. You know what I mean? Because it doesn't have that unique filmmaking style like a Tim Burton or like a
David Fincher.
Yeah, who has a voice. So. Although I like him, I don't think he's, particularly unique when it comes to that style of filmmaking, or his own personal style of filmmaking.
Right. I mean, he's fine. I don't have a problem with his directing. I do agree with you. Like, you wouldn't, if you didn't know directors, it would surprise you to know that the guy that directed Misery also directed The Princess Bride. It's hard to kind of reconcile those two titles together. I don't think there's anything wrong with not having a voice. Me personally, I like it better when I can recognize, because it's more interesting to watch a director kind of futz around with his like his philosophy or his psychology, or see what he has to say about a certain subject. And it's weird because Reiner comes up so much that he's not more of a favorite director of mine. Talking more about childhoods, it's interesting watching the behind the scenes featurettes, because I didn't know this, like talking with Richard Dreyfuss. And first of all, it's nice seeing Dreyfuss in the movie, because he is one of the first actors that I ever gravitated to, because Jaws was one of the first movies that made me fall in love with the magic of movies. And so Dreyfuss is always a sense of comfort to me. But I didn't know that they grew up together. And as he was telling the story, I thought, this is like me and Jonny. It's so strange. Like, they met when they were in their teens, about 15. They watched every movie together, Dreyfuss says. They bonded over movies. They talked about movies. And so they starred in plays together. Reiner directed some of the plays that Dreyfuss was in. And as they're saying, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's like Jonny and me. We that's how we grew up together. And so there's that, biographical kind of connection that we have with them. I just think it's interesting that he's not more of a presence in my film taste. I know that we did A Few Good Men. I know that Princess Bride is one of your favorite movies. We've talked about how the fantasy sequences are, they work because it's the child imagining it. For a while, I pushed against that because I'm like, how cheesy is this? Why does it look so cheesy? But that's because it's a 10-year-old that's how he would imagine it, which is funny because in this, and Princess Bride came a year after Stand By Me. It's weird to think about, but you mentioned the scene with Lardass, how the throw up and everybody, and you can see like the hoses, like the throw up is not coming. You can see it coming lower or higher. And it's interesting that if that's the perspective, like it's Gordy telling the story, but it's Chris and it's Teddy and it's Vern imagining it. Why wouldn't they imagine it more realistically instead of it being hoses and stuff like that? I don't know. So I like Rob Reiner. I agree with you that he's kind of branches out and does different things. He still acts. I guess. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. I mentioned that because that's kind of what I wanted to do as a director. If I ever got to direct movies, I always wanted to make sure that I did one of each genre, just because I like every genre. You know what I mean? I'm not really biased against other. Some are, but not really. So I'd like to be able to direct, different genres. And so the fact that he does that, I admire that.
Right. And, as far as directing goes, with this movie, I guess there's some shots of, the magic hour where they're walking next to a river or they're walking in a field. And so there are shots that are memorable, but they're not stand outish as far as realistic. I know that some of the shots are very symmetrical as far as the buildings are shot, like the way that they're framed when they walk by. And that's a very kind of 50s, 60s style of filming when you're trying to build that nostalgia and try to build like a Porter Rockwell type of feel to your story. So that, as far as the framing of the cinematography goes, I think it works rather well. I think, it kind of, it brings up that the feel of that time period. And Thomas Del Ruth, I think, was the cinematographer. He and Reiner work together, and they really they sell that. They sell the time. But it's not showy. I don't think that like A Few Good Men, or like when we did Taps, when we talked about that, the direction doesn't have to be showy because the story is kind of mundane. And to have, Orson Welles-y type shots that are very noticeable and very expressionistic, I think it would work against the story that's being told. So it's hard when you're talking about directing. I think the direction of this movie matches what the story should be. It doesn't take over, and you want to concentrate on the kids. You want to concentrate on the experiences that they're having. And the way that Reiner directs those kids is magic. What are your thoughts on, like, you've watched a lot of movies with kids in them. What are some of your thoughts on how kids should be directed, or some memories of movies that the kids are directed really well. And then we'll kind of I wanted to talk about the performances in this movie. What are some directors you think who direct kids very well?
Well, first of all, I think it depends on the kid, really, on the actor, because if the kid has talent, then it's going to be easier to get a good performance out of him. If he doesn't have any natural talent, you're going to have to kind of coerce him and try to get that, those reactions that you need and those emotions that you need. So you may have to use different tactics to get him to cry or to get him to, scream or be afraid, whatever it is you need. But if they have talent, it's going to be easier. It's just like with everything else. If you have a really talented actor, and it's all you do is put a camera in front of them and say action and let magic happen. But obviously kids are different because they're not fully mature yet.
Fully formed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So but I think Rob Reiner did a great job in this movie. I think he got good performances out of these actors. I think Corey Feldman's performance was great. I like River Phoenix. I like Will Wheaton. They all had these little moments. But I wanted to mention this. It seemed like these moments in the movie, even though they were well done, they're well acted, and they sold it. They kind of came out of nowhere, and I remember thinking that it kind of threw me off a little bit because it was kind of like, well, what sparked that? Why did he all of a sudden have to break down crying because of that, or why is he so upset about his dad being made fun of? I was just kind of like, that came out of nowhere to me, and you might have some reasons for why it worked, but when I saw it this time, I was kind of like, oh, that was weird. Even though it was good, even though it was a good performance, it was kind of like, where'd that come from? But like I say, he did a good job. I can think of the one that comes to mind is probably Haley Joel Osment. I think he did a good performance. I think M. Night Shyamalan did a good job directing him in Sixth Sense. But then again, I think Haley Joel Osment has talent, even though maybe he hasn't done some things recently that are mentionable. I think he was great in Sixth Sense.
Okay. Well, my friend Brian Young on Twitter, he mentioned something about Sixth Sense, and he hadn't seen it. And I think when we were working at Suncoast, the video store together, he finally got around to seeing it maybe a year after the movie was out. I can't remember the time, but I remember asking him what he thought of the performances, especially Haley Joel Osment. And I remember him specifically saying, he thought about it and he goes, I think there's a lot of power in whispering your lines. Osment whispers a lot of his dialogue, and so it's hard to tell if he's really, really good because the whispering is so intense that it's hard to tell how his range of emotions. But I do think that he does that very well. When I think of directors, I basically think of two extremes. I think of Chris Columbus directing the first two Harry Potter movies, where his style of direction was he would get the camera ready basically, and he would tell Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson and Rupert Grint, he'd say, okay, for this scene, I need you to look surprised. So make this face. For this scene, I need you to look sad. So make this face. And then they would copy him in the scenes when they were shooting it. So he got what he needed to get across, but I don't feel like they're kid performances. They're not heartfelt performances. It wasn't until later where they started getting into it. I think Alfonso Cuarón, when he took over Prisoner of Azkaban, he put them through exercises and he had them get to know the characters a little more. And that's when Radcliffe and Watson and Grint, their acting styles started getting enriched and started, developing much better, and it was interesting to watch. But the other extreme I think about is Steven Spielberg. I think when you think of directing kids, he is the master at it because Spielberg's a kid himself. He's able to get down to their level, and he's able to talk to them in a way that and you're talking about, you want to have talent first. Sometimes you need to pull that talent out of them. There are some kids where try as hard as you can't get that talent to shine through. But Spielberg is able to do that. I know that the two stories that I remember most fondly are Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where they had Cary Guffey was the actor who played Little Barry. There's a scene where, two scenes where he sees the spaceships, and Spielberg wanted a natural reaction. So he had Cary Guffey look out a window, and as he was doing that, Spielberg was up on a ladder, and he had a wrapped present, and he slowly opened the present and opened a box and brought out a toy. And you can see on Guffey's face, like the wonder of what he's looking at. But then as Spielberg pulls out the toy, he brightens and he goes, toys. And that's in the movie. And then another scene is when he wanted him to be scared. And so Barry's supposed to run into a kitchen, and there's supposed to be aliens that are off screen. And but he didn't want to scare him and scar him for life. So what he did is he had two guys. One was dressed in a clown costume. Another guy that was the makeup artist, I believe, was dressed in a gorilla costume. And when Barry turns that corner, Spielberg dropped a set of blinds and there was the scary clown. And so you can see Guffey react. And then Spielberg had him, the other guy, the gorilla, drop the blinds in front of him, and Guffey reacts again and he's bewildered. But then he had the gorilla, the makeup guy, take his head, take the mask and pull off the gorilla head so he could see, Guffey could see that was his friend that he'd worked with in the makeup chair. And you can see his face soften. It's just awe and wonder on his face. And the other thing I remember is Spielberg directing Henry Thomas or Drew Barrymore in E.T. He was able to sit down, get eye level with them, explain what E.T. was doing. For the scene where Barrymore has to cry when they're trying to resuscitate E.T., he was basically telling her, I need you to remember a story of when you lost a dog or when you felt really sad. And as she was doing that, as we were filming the scene, she had that in her head. And so real honest tears because she was remembering that. And then after the scene was over, Spielberg ran over and gave her a hug and basically made her laugh. And I just think that's magic, and it's hard to do. And Reiner has that with the four kids when they got together and when they were hired. I think it's interesting. They tell in the featurette that each kid are almost exactly like their characters. Will Wheaton's character was straight-laced growing up. River Phoenix was they literally say he was raised by hippies, and so he was kind of a flower child, kind of serious, philosophical kid. Corey Feldman had troubles at home, a lot like Teddy did, and then Jerry O'Connell was green. He'd never made a movie before, and so he didn't know what was going on. He didn't know who Rob Reiner was. He didn't know what it meant to shoot things, and so a lot of that comes across in their performances. But Reiner put them for the first week through exercises, theater exercises, to help them, get to know each other, to help them be more natural. The next week they performed scenes. The week after that, they went out to location, they performed scenes. And so there's a bond that the four kids had together that comes across on screen. And that's because of Reiner. That's a choice that he made to be able to get that friendship across. And even though we talk about the cinematography doesn't pop, that's good direction. I think that the direction of those kids is magical. I know you mentioned, and I do want to talk about a little bit about the monologues, but how did you feel the kids did, since I've talked so much? How did you feel each kid did as far as their performance wise?
I thought they were good. I think when I was younger, my least favorite performance was Jerry O'Connell. And I'm not sure why, maybe because he was green and because I could tell that he was a little bit fake. But everyone else, I bought into him. I believed him. I thought they did a really good job. I felt the same emotions they were feeling at times. So it was well done. And I like that you mentioned that Rob Reiner had them do exercises, and because you and I did that. We would practice our monologues. We would learn our lines, the very next day after getting the script, and we would do the character studies and write out what we thought our character was, where they came from, any kind of mannerisms they had. And then we would incorporate that into our character, into the scenes. And I think that's good. But I also think it's really important that you rehearse, that you have that time, because if you don't have that, then you don't have the familiarity of the actors, the set, where the camera's going to be. Because once you have all that, then you can forget the camera's even there. And then that's when magic happens, I think.
Yeah. Well, what were some of the scenes that you talked about where you're talking specifically about River Phoenix's scene where he talks about his the lunch money?
Yeah, that story about the lunch money when he's keeping guard at night when they're all sleeping by the campfire. Gordy wakes up and goes over and talks to him, and he starts telling that story about the lunch money and how the teacher, got away with it, and he was trying to do the honorable thing by giving it back, and then she took it. Yeah, I mean, it was well performed and well acted, and like I say, I think I felt something during that monologue, but I didn't understand where it came from. I was like, where is this coming from? Like, why is he having this moment now?
Yeah, well, I think, talking last time about Young Guns, we talked about, the big scenes that Lou Diamond Phillips and Casey Schmachko had. Their kind of the Oscar baity, oh, look at what I can do kind of scenes. I think a lot of it is that. I know the Chris Chambers scene where he talks about the lunch lady, that's in the book. But I know what you mean about how it suddenly becomes very emotional and he's crying about it. I just, as far as the acting goes, I agree with you that those are showcase scenes. As negative as that sounds, I like all the actors. It's just interesting watching Phoenix, especially. He's got something. I don't know how to explain it. Like everybody else does their job and they're great, but Phoenix has like an inner life, and he's able to, I don't know, he's able to kind of project emotion and project feelings in a way that's deeper and more profound than the other kids are able to, even though they're good. And that's what's sad, especially at the end when you see Chris walk off and he fades away. That's what happened to River Phoenix in real life. There's this real talent. You know, you think of Heath Ledger, you think of John Belushi, you think of all these guys that had something magical, but they were just taken from us way too soon. And that there is a very sincere feeling from Phoenix's performance, especially that, you know, I just enjoy. I know that it's like you said, it was a scene that you're like, where did this come from? But after the scene was over, you're like, that kid brought it. You know what I mean? I mean, he did it well. So, and again, I think that has to do a lot with Rob Reiner. I think that has to do with direction and being able to pull that talent out of what you've got in front of you. And that's no small feat.
Yep, I agree. Well said.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we there?
Yeah, I think so. Basically said everything we need to say. Your movie, why don't you go first? What do you think? Worth remembering or worth a remake?
Well, I would say worth remembering on this one. I still have fond memories of this movie. I really attached myself to the character when I first saw it. I like a lot of the scenes. I like I loved that vomit scene when I was younger. The leech scene, the junkyard scene. By the way, the junkyard scene, I couldn't remember what kind of dog that was. For some reason, I always thought it was a Rottweiler, but it turns out it was like a golden retriever or something like that. It's just funny that in my mind it was a scary Rottweiler dog when it really is like a little golden retriever. But anyway, I like that scene. I thought that was fun. Overall, it's a fun movie. It's you get engaged right away, and it keeps you engaged. And by the end, you're like you say, you're feeling something with Richard Dreyfuss there at the end, him playing with his kids. And so for me, I say worth remembering.
Okay, absolutely. It's funny that you talked about that junkyard scene because that's how the story goes. They think the way that the story's been built up, that this dog's going to be this giant Cujo looking monster, you know, kind of thing chasing after. And it's not. It's just a nice little golden retriever that would just rip your clothes. So I think that's funny. That's how it works. I would agree with you. I think this is worth remembering. This is one of the movies that's, you know, I remember when we did Taps, we thought, you know, out of all the movies we've done so far, or even 10 episodes later, we're like, I think Taps was the best one that we've done. That was the most high quality. We're surprised that it had that much of a pull. I think Stand By Me is one of the strongest ones that we've done, specifically because it nails 1,000%. It nails 1,000% that feeling of when you remember a time hanging out with your friends and the trouble that you got into and the journeys that you took and the experiences that you had together, and then realizing, and you know, you and I were still close, but a lot of our other friends have gone off and done so in a way we're Gordy and Chris, except if a fight ever breaks out in a restaurant, we have to make a pact that we're not going to stand in front of the people because they might have a knife. So we need to promise not to do that. But the way that it nails that feeling and that, you know, the longing for that time at the end, and it gave me a feeling that's very it shouldn't be written off. You know, it's very important that when a movie can do that to you and it can affect you like that, and it can bring you back and just absolutely hit the nail on the head, the feelings that you felt during that time. That's what you look for in movies. You want to be able to have that identification. And I think Stand By Me is definitely one of those movies.
I would agree. All right, well, let's take a little break. And then when we come back, I thought it'd be fun if we did like our top 3 adaptations of Stephen King movies.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, let's do that. Be right back. So real quickly, Darin, was there anything else that we left out that you want to bring up that you might have forgotten to talk about?
Oh, there was just a quick aside. I thought it was funny, like watching we talked about this before. When I watch a movie, like I like the end credits to sit through all of it so I can kind of have the feelings and the emotions of the movie set in. And while I was watching the credits, the names Anthony Marinelli and Brian Banks came up, who did the score from Young Guns last time. They did the music programming and they performed some of the score, some of Jack Nitzsche's score on this. So I just thought that was a funny tie-in. Like, oh my gosh, we just talked about them last week. So I thought that was great. But other than that, I think we covered everything we needed to cover.
Speaking of watching the credits, I remember the first time I saw a movie with you in the theater is the credits started to roll and I started to stand up and you were like, where are you going? We gotta watch the credits. And I was like, watch the credits? Like, what, are you crazy? But then like we started doing that. We sit through the credits and now I can't leave until the credits are over, thanks to you. But I remember being like, that's weird. It was when I watched the credits. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, I've helped you to swear, so obviously I've helped you to sit through and watch a movie how it was meant to be watched. You know, paying everybody the proper respect instead of getting up and leaving like a noob.
And having worked on movies, I think it's important to, you know, like I say, watch it and see who's done what, because that's the best part. When you're on the crew and you get to see your name on the screen, that's the best part.
Absolutely.
So, okay. I wanted to have our top 3 picks of our, you know, favorite Stephen King adaptations. And I'll go ahead and go first with my first pick. And my first pick was Shawshank Redemption. And again, it's another one of those movies that's more of a character study than it is a horror movie. And like I mentioned in the episode, I do like Stephen King's horror. I think he's really good at it. And I always really appreciated horror movies. But I really am drawn to the character studies, and I love watching a character, you know, start one place and end another place. And I think this movie does that. I love all the characters in Shawshank, and I love the ending. It's a very satisfying ending, and so that's why it's my first pick for this list.
Okay. Well, it's good that you picked that on there. It's not, I don't know if it would even crack my top 5 favorite Stephen King's. I do admire Shawshank Redemption. I just think that the movie is it's a tough sit. It's tough to sit through. And you're right, the characters do go on a journey, and that ending packs a wallet because like we talked about in Stand By Me, it builds to that. I just think that the ending is so enjoyable. It's tough. It's hard to get there. And so that's why I don't have it so high on my list. My number 1, I picked Carrie from 1976, Brian De Palma. I just think, and again, we talked about adaptations. When you're adapting something, you want the voice of the director, but you also want what you got out of the books. And even though the Carrie, the book was kind of it was like a collection of news clippings about the events that happened in this town that led up to the prom massacre. Brian De Palma was able to take it and streamline it and make it an actual story. But you get all the stuff from the books with all the scary stuff and, you know, the experiences that Carrie White is having, and especially with her mom. But then you also have all the De Palma trademarks. You have the split screens, you have the split diopters, you have the infatuation with sexuality and, you know, all that stuff that goes on that you don't normally see in movies that he's pushing the limits on. So I just think, as far as performances go, Sissy Spacek is very iconic in that role. It's just, out of all the movies I can think of that were adapted from King books, that's the one that I think that was a perfect melding of director and of novelist.
That's a good pick. Good director and good story. I like that pick. Number 2 for me is Misery. And again, a Rob Reiner movie. I like this movie because, again, it's a character study. It is very suspenseful. And I love watching just the slow movement of this story and to where it builds to this intense moment at the end when she, you know, breaks his legs and he has to escape and all that stuff. It's very, very terrifying in some, you know, respect. But I love that movie, and I love Kathy Bates' performance in this movie. And I actually met Kathy Bates on a film set, and she's the nicest lady you'll ever meet. Like, she was so nice to me. She even signed a copy of the script, and I have it somewhere. But really nice person, and so it's so fun to watch her play this really, you know, sadistic character.
And that's a sign of a good actor, right? That they can kind of dive deep and become something else. Like she, as Annie Wilkes in that movie, she is terrifying, and she does a perfect job. And so, yeah, I agree with it. That's, like we said, you wouldn't really know it's a Rob Reiner movie because he doesn't have any hallmarks to speak of. But as far as directing goes, it's a very well sustained piece of suspense. I do agree with that one. My second one is an obvious one. I had to put The Shining on here, not because I think it's a particularly, I know it scares a lot of people. I know my dad, it's his scariest movie of all time. And like we've talked about before, you know, horror is subjective. It's hard to be scared of Dracula when vampires aren't frightening to you. And so I don't personally think that the Shining terrifies me that much as a movie. And I know that Stephen King really dislikes that adaptation because the writing the book came from a very personal place when he was an alcoholic and when he was abusive towards his family, and he wrote the book to kind of exorcise those demons. And that's not really at the forefront of the movie. It's Kubrick basically showing off with the Steadicam. It's him creating a mood, which he does masterfully. I just think as far as Shining goes, it's fascinating, especially from the perspective of the movie Room 237, that documentary, where it has the different talking heads talking about how I don't know if maybe it's not talking heads, but it's basically just people talking about their experiences with the movie. And it's fascinating that you can watch that movie and there's 100 different interpretations you can get from there, depending on what you're looking for. It could be like, an Indian burial ground, that them coming back to wreak revenge. It could be like a statement against the way we treated Native Americans. It could be, Kubrick showing off and basically saying, I'm the one that created the moon landings. I'm the one that directed that. And so there's all these different clues. If you focus on you zoom in on one specific detail, the whole movie can mold to that perspective. I just think that's another thing that you're looking for in a masterpiece. I wouldn't call Shining a masterpiece. It's not quite up there, but it has a lot of the telltales where it's up for interpretation. It's not just one thing. And as far as that goes, I think it's a fascinating movie to try and parse your way through and try to figure it out. It's fascinating for me.
I like that you mentioned Room 237 because I actually watched that documentary. And at the end of the documentary, they actually played it forwards and backwards. And so you can actually watch the movie, or they showed how it lines up.
Yeah.
You can play the movie forwards and backwards in reverse at the same time. And at the middle, they meet up in the bathroom scene, in that red bathroom. And it almost lines up perfectly where like Jack is, it's just amazing to watch. But anyway, yeah, so good pick for that one. Now for my third pick, I thought about picking those kind of movies like The Stand or The Shining, but I didn't want to be pretentious.
No problem. I'll be the pretentious one. That's fine. One of us has to do it.
I wanted to pick something that was a little more obscure, and there's a movie that a book that he wrote that was turned into a movie that I really like, and it's called Needful Things, and it's not really well known. I guess it is, but it's not like one of the most well known movies. And anyway, I like it, and it's always stuck with me. And there's a scene in the movie where J.T. Walsh's character is like just killed his wife, and he's like on the phone with the devil, and he's like, I killed my wife. Is that wrong? And then you hear the devil say, hey, these things happen. And it's just something that always stuck with me. And so I will quote it like just in everyday life. If something bad happens, I'll be like, hey, these things happen. It's like, so anyway, that's why I like that movie. It's just memorable.
So you don't tell people that you've killed your wife, and is that wrong? That's not the line that you quote.
No. Maybe I'll start quoting that one.
Okay. Yeah, see what kind of reaction that gets out of people. All right. So for my third, I know it's more of a recent one, but I mentioned before that It is my favorite Stephen King book. And I really enjoyed the 2017, the Andy Muschietti remake of that or adaptation. I say remake because everybody knows the 1990 TV series with Tim Curry and Richard Thomas and John Ritter and Ed O'Toole. But there's just something about the book. Like I said, the Bill Denbrough character is an author, and his character made me want to be a writer. It's funny when you think about it shares a lot of similarities with Stand By Me. Gordy's a writer. Gordy also has a brother who's killed. Gordy also has parents who can't get over the fact that his brother's been killed. And so that kind of ties in. Obviously the group, Chris and Gordy and Teddy and Vern could be their own losers club. It's kind of I think it came afterwards, so they have that same similarities. But I know that the first part takes the kids' point of view, and I really thought that they nailed the point of the book. I thought that the kids did such a good job, especially singling out Sophia Lillis, who played Beverly. She's the River Phoenix of that movie. There's something to her that you can tell she's going to go somewhere. She's got a heart, and she's got an intelligence beyond her years, and you can see that in her performance. And then there's the Ben character, Jeremy Ray Taylor's the shorter, chubbier kid. There's a scene with Beverly where she takes his yearbook and she signs it, and his book is not signed. She's one of the first people to sign it. And just the look in his eyes of adoration and love for this person that's finally showing him some attention for the first time, that's hard to get across in a performance. I just think all those kid performances in the movie are magical, like the performances in Stand By Me are magical. And then like The Shining, it's not super scary because, you know, one character is afraid of, you know, there's a painting in his room that's has to do with his religion. There's another character, Eddie, who's he's afraid of germs. And so there's a leper that chases after him. And so not a lot of it is super scary. I just like, especially with the Beverly character, that her fear is blood. Like there's a scene in the bathroom, and it's in the book, where the blood comes out of the sink and it goes everywhere, and she's afraid to show her the boys this blood that's all over the place. And that's got a pretty deep connotation for girls, especially. It's not just being scared of something that jumps out at you and says boo. It's being scared of something that has to do with her body and the way that she's changing and the way that she sees that her dad is looking at her in a different way and the pharmacist is treating her. I just thought that the movie nailed that part of it, and that was more adult than even the TV series did. So my third pick is it. I just thought it did a really good job adapting that part of the book.
Okay, that's good. I liked the remake, but I had a hard time replacing Tim Curry. Even though it was Bill Skarsgård, is that who played Pennywise?
Yep.
I had a hard time getting past that, because I really thought Tim Curry's performance as Pennywise was. I mean, you can't repeat that. It was so creepy and so entertaining. I just loved Tim Curry's version of Pennywise.
Right. Well, they're after completely different things. I think the character itself in the movie would you say that Tim Curry's Pennywise is scary, or is he more like Alan Rickman and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, fun villain?
I think it's also just because that's what I know. I know that's how I know Pennywise, is by what Tim Curry did. And so it was really hard for me to replace what Tim Curry did with what Bill Skarsgård did. Even though it was different, I still was like, I had a hard time getting over that.
All right. That's understandable. I just wanted to know what you thought of if it was scary or not, Tim Curry, from that perspective. But
well, it was creepy. Definitely creepy. But,
yeah.
You know, overall, very good performance.
Yeah, and he's the best thing about that TV. He's the standout because he's so fun and entertaining, and he's so into it. So yeah, like I said, I could see what you mean.
All right. Well, those are our top 3 picks for Stephen King adaptations. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you have any of your own. If you want to tell us that you don't like ours, or you think you have a better list, show us. Let us know. Next week, Darin, our next episode, I actually forgot to tell you. I was going to tell you that we're going to have a guest, and the guest is going to be my wife. She has a movie she wants to talk about. She's been on the cast before. She did the Labyrinth episode with us, and so we're going to have her back on again. And we're going to talk about Swing Kids next time.
Okay. That the movie that you didn't tell me we're having a guest, but that's a good surprise. I know we've mentioned that before. That actually the movie I was going to pick for my choice, it'll sync better after we talk about Swing Kids. I think Swing Kids is a movie I've seen once, and it comes from that Newsies school. Newsies Dead Poets Society gets into the mix of that. So yeah, it'd be interesting to talk about that. That sounds great. That's one of my favorite episodes, the Labyrinth episode. We brought her in to be kind of a third voice because we didn't understand Labyrinth like somebody else would. So that'll be good to have her back.
Well, Swing Kids is a movie that her and I bonded over, and we used to always go swing dancing together when we were dating and when we were first married. So we'll have her back on. We'll talk about it. And But for NostalgiaCast, I'm Jonny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lundberg.
And we'll see you next time.
We'll see you guys.